The groom's hands were shaking, which was good, because it was the grooms whose hands did not shake that Rin Maren had learned to watch. "Breathe through your feet," she told him. "It works. Don't ask me why." Emmett Harrell, 20 years old, second son of the Up Valley Harrells, breathed through his feet. Across the writing table, his bride watched him do it with an expression that already held 3 decades' patience. And Rin looked back down at the page before either of them could catch her smiling like somebody's aunt. The Oath Book of Ivory Fen lay open on its stand, chained at the spine the way province books were chained everywhere, less against thieves than against weather, drunks, and enthusiasm. 400 years of the valley's promises, page after page after page, apprenticeships and fairy rites, grain depths and marriages, each entry witnessed, each one alive as long as its swearer was. People thought of the book as furniture, the way they thought of the bridge as furniture. It held them up all the same. She had made the ink that morning, before the light. Pine soot, iron salt, river water drawn from the fen's own channel where it ran fast enough not to freeze, and 3 drops of blood apiece from 2 young people who had both tried to give more, as if generosity there earned anything but a sore thumb. The ink smelled the way vow ink always smelled, pine and iron, resin and blood, the smell that meant the words have weight to anyone raised in the 9 valleys. It sat in its stone well at her elbow, darker than any black had a right to be. "You've read it through," she said, not a question, and put the fair copy in front of them anyway, because that was the law, and also because she had once watched a man discover at the table that his father had negotiated his marriage contract's grazing clause without telling him. And the craft had rules for a reason. They read it through. It was a plain cord-weight marriage oath, mutual, the words as old as the book, to hold and be held, to keep and be kept, in lean years and full ones, until release or death. The Harrells had wanted a fidelity rider with teeth in it. The bride's mother had wanted a labor clause about the orchard. Rin had talked both families out of both. A marriage oath was heavy enough at its plainest cord weight, a binding that could cripple its breaker, and the couples who lauded them with riders were the ones, in her experience, who had reasons to think they'd need them. These 2 needed nothing but the plain words, and somewhere to live that wasn't either mother's kitchen. "Speak it when you're ready," Rin said. "There's no wrong speed." Emmett spoke it too fast. Lyse spoke it too slowly, and by the middle of the 2nd line she was speaking to him and not to the page, which the law had no opinion about, and Rin privately marked as the best omen the morning had to offer. As the last word landed, Rin dipped the brush and wrote, "There was no wind of power. There was no light. That was shrine play, the stuff of festival puppets. There was only this," her hand laying the words down her line, the witness line, her name and license beneath, and the small cold certainty, arriving like a key turning somewhere out of sight, that the thing was done. Every scribe felt the turn. None of them could describe it to anyone who hadn't. Rin felt considerably more than the turn, and had spent 9 years making sure her face didn't show it. To her eyes alone, in this valley, so far as she knew and prayed, the fresh script had risen off the page and settled over the 2 of them like frost forming in fast forward. A pale tracery across Emmett's forearm, its twin across Lyse's, fine-stroked, silver, taut with newness. Cord weight, cleanly made. It would fade from her sight of it to a resting shimmer within the hour. For now it was bright as a wet brushstroke, and there was no other word for it, and she had stopped looking for one. Beautiful. "That's it?" Emmett said, looking at his own arm, where he would never see anything. "That's it. Congratulations. If you want the shivery version, the Shrine Gate does a lovely one in summer, with paper." Lys laughed and cried a little, and both their mothers surged in from the doorway where they had been strenuously not listening, and for a few minutes Rin's office was full of people and pickled plums and someone's uncle's opinion about snow coming early, and she let it be full, and entered the fee. in the day ledger, and did not once look at the silver strands now knotted through the room like something a spider would build if spiders loved anyone. She saw them out from the office step, which was the scribe's part of the custom. The couple went first, the families after, and the newly bound crossed the market lane into their changed life while the book's keeper watched from the doorway. So the vow sees its first weather. The fen saying went, and like most fen sayings, it was older than anyone's explanation of it. Emmet and Lice went out into the grey morning, with the snow smell coming down off the teeth, and the whole lane pretending not to watch. And at the corner by the dye house, the boy stopped and turned and looked back at the office, not at Rin, at the building, at the window behind which the book held his line now, and raised one hand, uncertain, the way men saluted things they had no form for. Rin raised hers back, scribe to sworn, and the couple went around the corner and were gone. And to her eyes alone the new silver went with them, taut and bright, out into weather no book could keep for them. That was the work. 1,100 times, and the doorway part had never once gone ordinary. She was 25 years old. She had written 1,100 oaths in this book, on the good days, of which this was one. She could go whole hours forgetting that the gift that let her prove her own work better than any scribe in Sorei was the same gift that would end her life here, end it, polite, with a guild escort and a lifetime salary. If a single one of these warm, loud, pickled plum-bearing people ever understood what she could see, the morning's other business was smaller and better loved, which was the ordinary proportion of the work. Old Mott the cooper came in to release his apprentice, 4 years served and the boy gone journeyman to a shop in the 3rd parish, a thread-weight release, 2 minutes of formula, and then 20 of Mott standing at the stand with his hat in his hands, failing to leave, because the release was 2 minutes and the boy had been 4 years, and the craft had no clause for that part. Rin gave him tea and let him tell her about the boy's first barrel, which had reportedly held water in the technical sense only. To her eyes, the old thread between them faded as they talked, silver going to the pail of honorable discharge, and she performed her small private liturgy for it, the one nobody had taught her, witnessed, kept, concluded clean. Some scribes, she suspected, grew numb to it. She had promised herself early that the day a clean release bored her was the day she surrendered the license. And near noon, stamping snow dust off his boots with riverman ceremony, came Doran the ferryman to post the winter crossing notice as his family had posted it every first snow week for 400 years. The ferry's hours halved, the ice watch begun, crossings at the horn's discretion until thaw. The Doran service oath was the oldest working binding in her book. Older than the bridge, older than the parish bounds, and it lay across the old man's shoulders in her sight like cable, thick with the pewter of generations, the single most beautiful piece of craft in the valley, and the least remarked. He signed the notice and paid the filing penny and spent his customary moment at the stand with his cap off, respect to the book, the River family's habit, and Rin watched, as she watched every year, how carefully his eyes did not go to the D-leaves where his family's pages lived, and how much older he got in the not looking, and said nothing, because a scribe learned early which silences were rented and which were owned. "Snow'll hold off till dark," Doran said, at the door. "Then it won't. Mind your lamps, scribe." Her sister came by at midday with dye to her elbows and someone else's gossip. The Herald boy cried, Tessa said, unloading bread and a covered bowl onto the one corner of the work table Rin kept bare for exactly this invasion. Half the town saying it, the other half saying his mother cried harder. "I don't discuss clients. You discuss the miller's release for a week." The miller's release was a matter of public record and also very funny. Rin cleared a second stool with her foot. "Sit. Eat your own bread. How's the vat work?" "Blue." Tessa held up her arms as evidence. Blue to the elbow, proud of it. 19 and good at something and pleased daily by the fact. and it caught Rin under the ribs the way it sometimes did. Out of nowhere. 9 years of ferrying this one person over the gap their parents left, and here she was on the far bank, blue-armed, unafraid. Bindings nowhere on her but the thread-weight apprentice vow at her wrist. Silver, resting easy. That, Rin did not say, was the other thing about the sight that no one warned you of. You could watch the people you loved being fine. There was no craft word for what that was worth. They had done the arithmetic of the gap the hard way, the two of them. River fever. The wet spring Rin was 16. Their mother on the week's second market day. Their father 11 days later. And the house suddenly a ledger with 2 columns and 1 literate hand. She had been Master Fen's copygirl then. Unlicensed, paid in training. Fen, old already, kind in the absent way of men who love their filing more than their filers, had gone to the guild circuit on her behalf, and come back with a dispensation nobody had ever heard of. Examination at 18. License at 19 if she passed provisional, the youngest in the province's book. She had passed provisional. She had passed everything. There had been a 10-year-old at home who needed the fee scale of somebody who passed everything. And if the examiners had found her touch readings uncannily exact, and if she had learned in those 2 years to be precisely, plausibly, very good, and never once impossible, well, the gap had trained them both. Tessa had learned to cook out of a dead woman's recipe box. Rin had learned that a gift could be rationed like flour, and that fear made an excellent measuring cup. Herald wedding means the coat trade started, Tessa said now. Around the bread. 3 mothers in the shop this morning wanting winter blues before the next one's cold. I told Master Cole we should bless your book at festival. Half our custom walks out of it. She grinned, blue-knuckled. My sister. The economy. You're doing the face, Tessa said, watching her over the bread. I don't have a face. You have a face like the book just told you something. She leaned over the day ledger without shame. Anything good? Anybody swearing anything stupid? Not today. Today was all sense. Rin moved the ledger. Which frightens me. Sense never lasts a season. She meant the snow. Every scribe knew the calendar. First snow shut the high passes. The circuit court stopped riding. And the valley's promises turned inward for the winter. Repairs, debts restructured over hearths. Marriages moved up because a betrothal was threadweight. But a wedding was heat in the house. From now until thaw, the book and the town would hold each other close, and her office would smell of wet wool and other people's arguments. She was looking forward to it. That was the year's shape, and it was hers. Tessa left with the bowl and the gossip. The snow began an hour later, steady, the kind that meant business, big flakes, windless, the sound of the town going quilted. Rin lit the lamps, took down the standing files, and did the quiet end-of-day proofing that was the actual secret of her reputation, page by recent page, her eyes half-lidded, checking the living script against the written one. A scribe with only ordinary eyes proofed the words. Rin proofed the bindings, weight true, strokes whole, nothing festering. In 9 years of the province book, 3 as Fen's copygirl, 6 under her own license, she had caught 2 forgeries, 1 error of her own that still woke her at night, and 1 marriage gone so quietly septic that she had invented a records problem to get the wife alone and ask, in the neutral grammar of her craft, whether the release statute was something she wanted explained. That one she had not handled well. That one she did not think about on good days. The proofing hour was her grandmother's, really. It had been Rin Maren's kitchen table first, a small girl and an old woman and a lamp, and the valley's gossip retold as pages. The smith's boy swore his articles, second market day, close your eyes, tell me the weight. The sight trained the way other households trained pitch or thrift. Casually, ruthlessly, under cover of peeling roots for supper. Rin had been 6 when the first law was laid down, the grandmother's thumb tapping the little brush against her knuckles for emphasis. What you see is called the living script. Rin cub, and it is the realm's, and the seeing of it is yours, and you will never once say so aloud, not to your mother, not to the shrine, not to a soul, or the capital will come and make a drawer of you. She had been too young for drawer to mean anything, except that her grandmother's voice went flat saying it. She was not too young now. Murray had held the secret 60 years and died with it easy. Had held Fenn's whole book in her head unlicensed and let him take the credit for 40 of those years. Had left Rin the brush, the law, and the habit of this hour, lamp, pages, eyes half-lidded, the day's promises checked against their ink like coin, bitten at a counter. Somewhere under the proofing, every evening, Rin supposed she was still at the kitchen table. It was not the worst place to live. Outside, the snow thickened against the shutters, and the town made its first snow sounds, the shrine gate's bell as somebody tied a winter vow, the ferry horn's last crossing called short and flat across the dark, boots in the new hush of the market lane, the valley pulling its promises indoors, as it did every year, to keep them by the fire. She was 3 pages into the proofing when the banging started. It was Doran the ferryman's grandnephew, 15, snow to his knees and no coat, and what he said at her door made no sense the first time, so she made him come into the stove and say it again. Under the birches at the second landing, he said, where the road comes down to the water. Garrick, the tanner's Garrick, he's dead, scribe. He's marked dead. The boy's voice did the thing that voices did around forswearing, dropping as if the word could hear itself. Forsworn. It's all up his arm. Black, like burn, like frostburn. My uncle sent me. He said come to you before the reeve, he said. He said you'd want to see it before anyone walks on anything. Wise old Doran. Rin was already pulling her boots on. Garrick, she said evenly, working the pin from her hair to let it fall for the way outside, and taking the pin between her teeth while she wrapped up, the pin that was not a pin but her grandmother's worn brush, its lacquer gone soft-edged with 60 years of hands, and if she carried it into every hard hour of her life like a talisman, that was a private eccentricity between her and the dead. Garrick, who holds the tannery lease. Garrick, who swore the water rights renewal at this table in the spring. That's him. That's not a man with a chain-weight oath on him. She said it half to herself, coat going on. Forsworn to death meant a grave breaking, cord weight or worse. Lease and water rights were solid thread, all of it. She had written most of it. A man could burn every thread vow he had, and it would scar and ache and shame him, and he would live to be pointed at. It doesn't kill at his weight. It can't. The boy looked at her with the flat trust the town kept for her. Worse than any guild ordered. Then somebody should tell his arm, he said. The snow had made the road a held breath. Down at the second landing the birches stood in their white, and the river ran black between white banks, and a knot of lanterns burned where nobody's lanterns had business being. And Rin walked the last 50 paces, reading the scene the way she read, everything. Ledger first, who stood where, who owed what, whose boots had already tramped the ground she'd have wanted clean. Doran had kept them back. Bless the man, he ran a ferry on a service oath older than his grandmother, and he understood in his bones that some things were pages, and you did not step on pages. Garrick lay on his back under the birches, as if he had sat down against one, and slid. Snow in his beard, no wound anybody had found. His right sleeve was pushed to the elbow, Doran again, checking for the thing he'd then sent a boy running about, and his forearm, wrist to elbow, was black. Not bruise black, script black. Burned in strokes, crusted like frost gone to char, the unmistakable brand every child in Sorei was raised to dread on a debtor's arm, or a deserter's, forsworn. The mark of a man who had broken faith so gravely the ink had killed him. Garrick the tanner, who had stood at her table in the spring smelling of bark and beeswax, and sworn the water rights renewal with a joke about wedding his own tannery one day. The same plain thread vows his father had held before him. Who, in the voices already gathering beyond the yard, had never broken a promise in his life that anyone had heard of. Nobody's touched him, Doran said at her shoulder. Reeve's been sent for. Slower than you. A pause. It's wrong, isn't it, scribe? Tell me how wrong it is. Rin knelt in the snow. To any eyes in the valley but hers, the black scarring was the whole of what there was to see, and it was already impossible. Thread oaths did not kill. What she could see, and could never say she saw, was so much worse, that for 3 long breaths she did not move at all. A binding, once made, was a living line. She had no better language for it. Taut when tested, silver at rest, silken fine. Garrick's bindings were all where she had written them. The lease. The water rights. His marriage cord, 20 years settled and soft. Every one of them was severed. Not broken, she knew broken. Broken burned from the inside, a man's own act blackening his own strokes. These were cut, clean at the near end, and the cut ends had curled, each one, like paper touched to a lamp flame, crisped back on themselves, dead white, the way nothing in 9 years of reading living script had ever looked, because what she was looking at did not happen. There was no craft that touched the strand itself. There was fulfillment, release, death. There was no knife. Somewhere behind her the Reeves lantern was coming down the ferry road, and the snow went on with its quiet work, filling the boot prints, dressing the birches, laying its clean page over the whole black, impossible evening. Rin took off her glove and held her bare hand an inch above the dead man's ruined arm, reading it again, making herself a witness to each curled white end in turn, fixing them in the trained, cold place she kept for testimony. Scribe, Doran said again, gently. How wrong? His page is in my book, she said, which was not an answer, and was the only one that mattered. She stood and pinned her hair, and became for the watching lanterns the even, deliberate official the province required. Wrong enough that I'll be reading it tonight. Keep everyone off the landing until the Reeve's done. And Doran, the next rider through, whatever direction they're going. She looked north up the ferry road, where the snow erased it into the dark. Word goes to the circuit. This gets written down bigger than my book. She walked back up the hill with the snow filling her tracks behind her, and let herself think it once, in the privacy of her own skull, in her own craft's grammar, where it was most terrifying. Somebody had struck a living page, and she was the only reader in the valley who could see the hand. In the office, the lamps had burned low. She took the chained book onto its stand, found the tanner's leaf, and began, carefully, in her smallest and most exact hand, on a witness sheet no law yet required, to write down what could not be there.